Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cinema Wave podcast here at the Culture Wave Media Network, and we are here to cover Gladiator II. This is another one of the most highly anticipated movies of the year, starring Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, Pedro Pascal, a bunch of other people. I'm going to be one of your hosts for this episode. My name is Darian Zach. I am joined this time by Zach Miller.
What's going on?
We've been waiting to talk about this one for a little bit.
Yeah.
On the weekend of Glicked, we did have Liz, our special guest Brian and Michael covering Wicked. We have the pleasure of covering Gladiator 2. This is one that the first time when it was first announced, I feel like we were both excited about it, but there's always skepticism, right? When there's such a high profile sequel coming out, but also a sequel where it was like, how are they going to do this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously, for spoiler alert for anyone who's never seen the first Gladiator, if you're watching this and you haven't seen the first Gladiator, click off the video. But obviously, the main character in the first Gladiator dies. Russell Crowe's character dies at the end of the first Gladiator, as does Joaquin, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So our two main characters are gone. Our only holdover character is Connie Nielsen. She returns in this film, but they bring in basically a whole new cast of characters. There's new emperors, these twin emperors that are played by Joseph Quinn, who's best known for Stranger Things, and Fred Hetchinger, who kind of made a name for himself in season 1, I think it was, of White Lotus. But you get the Denzel of it all. This is, I think, the first movie Denzel's done with Ridley Scott since American Gangster. You have Paul Mescal, this rising star, this great Irish kid who has a lot of potential as an actor, but now this is him kind of getting a chance to do something more IP driven, right? So there was a lot of questions and things like that. Where were you leaning towards even going into this movie? Like, were you thinking, were you optimistic about it? Were you expecting one thing and then got something different? How did you feel kind of going into Gladiator 2?
I was, I think to go into this movie, I was a little skeptical because of how Ridley's last few movies have been. They haven't performed the best. A lot of people think that he's aging out with his directing technique. And I think before you watch this movie, you should really focus on the cast. And Ridley is someone who can cast people very well and adequately for the roles in the story. So I knew that the cast was going to make or break this film. But when you have sharp actors in this, like Denzel and Paul and Pedro, and then you're bringing back Connie, and you have Joseph Quinn as one of the emperors, I knew that was a very strong bet for the film to be decent, at least. It was really about how would they make this a new story, while also paying reference to the first movie. And I think the film is something that has a lot of the identity of the first movie in its DNA. It follows a lot of the same revenge themes, but I think there are things that are expanded on in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the thing with this is, and I had said this off camera, I think the approach with this movie was different compared to the first one. I mean, you have to also think the first movie came out 24 years before this one.
Yep.
So it's a completely different time in filmmaking. At that point, Ridley Scott was still, not to say that he's a well-respected director, but let's just go through his last maybe 4 movies before he did this, right? You had Napoleon, which was very polarizing. A lot of people did not like that film. I think you included.
Yeah.
You and Vinny had reviewed that one. House of Gucci, another one kind of split. I think more people disliked it than liked it. The Last Duel was one.
I like The Last Duel.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It wasn't anything short of spectacular, but like he's someone that has so much ingenuity with his spectacle, but that movie was not focused on spectacle. I liked that, honestly. Yeah. It just wasn't something that's going to blow you away like his other big franchise piece temples.
Yeah, exactly. And then before that, the last one he had done was All the Money in the World, which had obviously a crazy thing happen when Spacey was a massive part of it before, obviously, the downfall of him. So they had to come back and reshoot, and they had to cast Christopher Plummer. So he's had a very tumultuous sort of last 8 or 9 years in the industry. And this was the one that everyone was even saying, they were like, this is what's going to get Ridley back on top, even at I think he's like 86, I think, or something like that. He's up there in age, 80, 83 maybe. But this was one that there was a lot of eyes on what he was going to do. And also, like you said, skepticism, because he was kind of plucking at this other really fantastic movie that he had made a really long time ago.
Yeah.
And people were like, you don't want to mess up the legacy that movie already has. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's a Best Picture winner. Like, how are we going to now IP, like, I'm trying to think of a better word, but monetize essentially, like, from what was not a franchise and creating a franchise out of it.
Yeah.
Because he's now in the process of writing Gladiator 3, which we can get into at the end, obviously. But
really,
yes,
wow.
he's already started writing Gladiator 3.
Did not know that.
Yeah,
wow.
So it's going to be interesting to see where they go with that. But let's go back to, you already alluded to it. Let's talk about the performances, right? Because so much of this movie is driven on the performances, and this is a bigger ensemble in terms of name recognition and screen time probably than the first Gladiator. So much of that is really driven by Russell Crowe and Joaquin and then Connie Nielsen to a degree. This, you're dealing with so many different characters and so many different moving parts. I want to focus first on Denzel because I think he's the one that a lot of people are discussing. Denzel plays this character who he's kind of this, he has a bit of a rogueness to him. Like he's not as he seems on the surface, especially in the beginning when we get him meeting Paul's character, who eventually becomes a gladiator, a prisoner of war essentially, and he buys him, Denzel, and he has him going through. Maximus is the character name. He's going through all these trials with Paul Mescal's character, and what I really liked about what Denzel did with this is that he created a character that was very much him, but at the same time spoke to something that felt real for the times and where they were going with trying to modernize sort of this take of Roman times. How did you feel about Denzel's performance in the movie?
I liked it a lot because I was a fan of how his archetype was structured. We've seen this archetype before in film and TV. Like the first thing that comes to mind is Littlefinger in Game of Thrones, because the same strength with those characters is that they are always after power and they're always after getting ahead. So that's exactly what became prevalent to Denzel as the movie progressed. And because originally I assumed they were going to go back to the original framework of the first movie, and that he's buying and selling gladiators. He's in it for the payday, but there was a lot more complexity to his role, and it was about justifying himself to get ahead. And he would continuously describe to Mescal that, you have to look out for yourself, and like, you get this shot in the ring, you have to take it, because that's how Rome operates. Rome operates under its own volatility. So that, I really loved the direction with his character, and he was very unpredictable. And by the by the conclusion, the only way to outsmart him was to stay one step ahead of him and to outdo his plan. So I really liked how they made a simplistic character become complex, and Denzel attributed that a lot to his directing or his acting. So I don't know if I necessarily felt it was modernized personally. I think it could just be Denzel's delivery that feels modern, because we also don't know how everything was said in ancient Rome. But like, there is a certain cadence with the rest of the characters that feels a little Shakespearean and proper. And Denzel instead decided to follow with the gusto and sliminess at points too. Like he just feels very grounded, and he's getting down in the mud a little more than the prim and proper emperor and the general, and he's not a official leader either. So I think that could be another layer. And the choices that he made too with his character, he's not somebody that is going to be lazy, in his delivery. Like, he's not going to say, oh, like, I don't need to work on it. Like, he's someone who made those choices for a specific reason. Maybe it was because it was a human element, but what did you think about that side of it? And
the exterior of his character, I think, is something where it's very unique to, like, no one else would be able to do what Denzel did with that. Like, the quilts that he has, like, and the way, and I was reading an interview about it with the costume designer about how he would like constantly fix his tunic and do it like a certain way to be very specific, and how it's almost like Maximus wanted to aspire to have that legacy and to have that sort of like rich exterior again, like that, like coming from someone who was an ex-slave, which we learn towards the end of the film that he was owned by Lucius's grandfather.
Yeah.
Like that part of it I thought was a really great way to sort of interweave the story from the original and like what came beforehand.
Right.
But also just the way like the way that Denzel worked so explicitly, it feels like, on his character design and the choices that he made as a character to go against the norm of what we would be accustomed to seeing throughout Gladiator and Gladiator 2 is what I think I liked so much about it, despite the fact that it feels so different and off the beaten path of some of the other characters. But like you alluded to, I think it really plays into who Maximus is as a character too. Like he wants to pose this. He's also buddy with everybody. Like you see it even in the way he discusses things with like members of the Senate, and he like wants to one up them and do more bets, and he kisses them on the cheek.
But he's using them too.
Yes, 100%.
He's a wolf wearing sheep's clothing. I think that's also part of the costume design, is what you're saying too. Now that I think about it, is like he's fitting in, he's putting on that persona, but at his core, he's like, I see Rome for what it is.
Yes.
Like I know that this is always a power struggle. I won't buy into that. You know, I've seen people live and die by the sword too many times and then use others for their own devices. So I'm gonna do that myself in my own way. And that's why he's like trying, like he even says to Paul is like, I will use you as my instrument in that way.
Yeah.
Like he's just another pawn in his game.
100%.
So that's what when Paul figures that out through a series of events in the film, he's like, I'm not falling for this. I have to outsmart him in that way.
But it's cool because you can see the dichotomy too between like the grittiness of who Maximus is, while also, like you were talking about, the difference of appearance and who he wants to appear to be, right? He's like, the character's so complex, but the other thing is that, not to say the other characters didn't have this, but you just feel like Denzel's having like so much fun doing this. You know what I mean? Like I just felt like it was cool to see Denzel do something that felt very outlandish in a way in comparison to the things we've seen him do in recent years. Like I feel like he hasn't done something like this in a long time.
Sure.
But obviously the whole movie doesn't go through Maximus, right? Lucius and Paul's portrayal of being Russell Crowe's character's son, which it's in the trailer. So if you didn't already know that, that's not a spoiler. That's in the trailer for the films. But there's a complicated thing that comes with that as well, because he doesn't go by his real name for 80% of the movie, 85% of the movie. And there's that whole complex narrative, which I really appreciated. I'm curious what you thought about how Lucilla, his mother, obviously Connie Nielsen's character from the first film, when she realizes that this is her son, she wants to protect him at all costs, but it is in Lucius's, like, he wants to kill the general that's played by Pedro. Like that's and Pedro's also Lucilla's husband in the film. So what did you think about that whole narrative? And did you want to see, like, I love that part of the story. I actually wanted to see a little bit more of it, but what did you think?
Yeah, I really love that part of the story too, because that's another thing I respect Ridley for doing, is he used that storyline as a setup for another revenge plot, because we've seen the storyline. That's why I think this storyline is different and it has its own identity from the first movie, is this storyline is more fixated on the domination of Rome, the false hopes of Rome, and the misguided valor of Rome, and how people are starting to not believe in their leaders as much anymore and being realized that they're being taken advantage of. So I really liked how, it's a very black and white beginning of Rome is attacking us. They're going to take us over. They're going to enslave us. Like, that's about to happen. Pedro gives a little bit of an inkling that he's a little reluctant to do this after the first battle, because he sees all of these people die or they burn the bodies of the dead. He's like, how many more times am I going to go through this? And that is what was really strong about his character, is there's really no morally black and white characters in this movie, when I feel like in the first movie, Joaquin was like absolute evil. Like he was like a sadist. He enjoyed seeing people die.
Yeah.
He enjoyed the manipulation and taking people out for power. And I think in this movie, Pedro realizes in his own way that he's become a pawn in the Emperor's games. And Paul is also like, I'm enslaved now to this. I returned to Rome, and I didn't want to return to Rome because I see what it holds over people, and my
Mhm.
wife just got killed. So there's a whole level of that. But then it takes time for them to finally meet in the ring, and they're like, Paul is fully ready to kill him, but he sees Pedro for who he is, and he's like, look, like, I didn't want this as much as you. I'm just a soldier in the army. Plays to Russell Crowe's original feelings as well. He kind of just wanted out. Marcus Aurelius gets killed. There's a whole thing with that. So I like how really entwined the first film's narrative with new stories, and it didn't feel completely derivative as opposed to other sequels I've seen in the past where they're just like milking
Oh
nostalgia
yeah.
from the first one. This one, it does milk a little bit at points, especially with like the same movements with like the hand of the sand and then the armor, the speech in the arena. Like there are parts of it, but it does still ultimately feel in servitude to the story. It doesn't feel like we're doing this out of the fact that people loved it the first time, so let's do it again. Like it feels like it's still servicing the narrative.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not
Yeah.
like, for lack of it, it's not like the member berries that we're so
Yeah.
accustomed to getting and everything. Like that's how I felt with obviously way different thing, but like Beetlejuice like earlier in the year. Like I thought it was a good sequel and it's fun, but so much of it is just like playing off of what you saw in the first movie. There's definitely some aspects of this film where I think that he tries to do things differently, but like you said, also pay homage to what came before, because there are going to be people and casual movie fans that are going to go there to be
Right.
like, how are they going to connect this to the first movie? Because that's important to them, right? If you're going to touch something that felt so sacred to so many people, you want to pay tribute or homage to exactly what that's going to be. But I agree with you. I think so much of what makes this one of the more superior sequels that has come out in recent years is the fact that they try to do something really different with it. But also like with Pedro's character, which is his name is General Acacius, so much of with his character also feels pure in the way that it's like somebody that Lucilla would move on for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he possesses so much of what Marcus Aurelius had in the first movie. Still, like you could look at Pedro and Russell Crowe's characters and be like, I can understand.
And Maximus. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly. Yeah.
100%. So
Yeah.
I agree with that. The emperors. Now this was a con for me. I don't know how
Okay.
you felt.
Yeah. Okay.
Obviously they are playing. It's Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger, as I said. Joseph Quinn plays emperor named Gaeta. Hetchinger plays Emperor Caracalla, I think it's pronounced. And they're very they're very over the top, these characters. Now there's obviously this psychotic nature to the two of them. They allude to the fact that Hetchinger's character has sort of like a mental illness towards the end of the film. And that's kind of addressed in probably one of my favorite scenes with them, which is towards the end when Macrinus kind of gets in Caracalla's ear and then he kind of opens up and he's like, he tried to choke me out in the womb. And it's like, Jesus Christ, dude, like this is crazy. But to me, there were like, the scene with the monkey actually evoked a lot of laughter in the theater.
Yeah.
I don't know how you felt about that, but there's just certain things that I felt was so over the top with their characters, and I thought that I understand for the characters is what they were going for, but to me, I thought the performances were a little overdone. Did you feel similarly to that?
I think they were overdone, but I also think that there was very few roads that really could go after following up Joaquin. Like I don't think he wanted to also put into the same light of Joaquin.
Yeah, the same like archetypes he was possessing.
And he didn't want to go down the road of the emperor gets disrespected, I'm gonna go kill this Paul Mescal guy. Like, you know, I don't think he wanted to delve down that because he knew that would be critiqued poorly, probably. Like if you just made something that derivative, it's gonna piss people off a little bit. So I liked what they did in the extreme sense of like that they made them these caricatures of like they are so frivolous, they're so blatantly, they're like, no, next campaign, like we're going to take everything over. And it was just like, okay, they literally have no remorse for anyone that has just died for Rome. How much more land do you need? How many more shows do you need? How much more blood has to be shed? So I liked how they made them these obscene extreme emperors that they pushed the people of Rome to the brink where they literally asked for their heads at some point. So I liked how they made them these ego-driven people, extreme people who just wanted bloodshed. And Pedro was like one of the first people to call it out. He's like, I can't be a part of this anymore if that's all they're gonna do. Like,
Yeah.
I buy into this idea because nothing is ever enough. I've watched too many people die. What are we doing this for? You know, like I liked how it focused less on the emperors and it put them into just caricatures. Like I liked that route, but were they a little over the top at points? For sure.
Yeah,
Like,
I think what you were talking about with the scene with Pedro in particular, when he comes back from that opening war sequence,
yeah,
the balancing out of that, I think, fit the tone that I wanted, where it's like, I understand if they're going to be a certain way, but then balance. And that's how I felt even with the sequence later in the film with Maximus too, when Caracalla eventually kills his brother, and the way that they kind of go about that, and how it's so outlandish that he decides to make his monkey first counsel.
Yeah.
And then Denzel comes out and he's like, hand for Marcel.
Yeah.
The whole sentence.
I thought it was, and it was like supposed to evoke laughter.
Yes.
Like, I have to imagine, because it was just like, this is ridiculous. That, like, even that was how the Senate felt.
Exactly.
They were like, are you kidding me? Like,
but I actually love the tonal whiplash you get. I think Ridley does such a good job in this movie of the tonal whiplash at times with that, because you go from that sequence to him then announcing that Maximus is his second counsel, and everyone kind of is like, all right, thank God, like, there's somebody we respect and we actually feel like has a plan. And then he goes away, and then he just takes out Gaeta's head.
Yeah.
It's just like, holy shit. Like,
Yeah,
the visual
right?
of going from seeing a little capuchin monkey on a throne to seeing the former emperor's head just like out
Passed
for
around,
everybody to see and be like, this is what is coming. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
this is what I'm responsible for, like, basically. And I thought that that was one thing that I really loved about this movie, is the pacing of it. Like, it actually feels, and the cut queen Liz is producing, so I wonder how she feels about this. But the movie is 2 hours and 24 minutes, and it really didn't feel like it to me at all. Like, I felt like it really went really, really well in terms of the tonal pacing of it. And like, off the top of my head, like, could you have cut maybe 5-10 minutes? I'm sure you can kind of trim around the edges, but I thought that every relationship that Lucius builds over time, and the coalition that he sort of brings together with him throughout, everyone respecting his skills as a gladiator and what he's doing to not only live, but to kind of prove all these awful emperors and people in power wrong. I thought there was so much real. It's not like the movie needed world building, but coming off of what you did in the first Gladiator, you really do have to reassociate yourself with this new Rome that comes 16 years after the first movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I thought that they did a really good job of establishing that and not doing so much where it felt like it was just explaining for the sake of explaining. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I don't think that was like, it felt earned. Like, yeah, the runtime felt earned. It didn't feel like they strayed very far. I loved all the battle sequences. I also think that the movie focuses on spectacle really well, like kind of returns to that side of it in the first one. You know, there's great battle sequences. There's great establishing shots to see how widespread Rome is. And then I really just appreciated everything that really did to rebuild this world and to see what it's descending into. So, yeah. What was your next point on?
No, I was saying no. I want to talk about a little bit, go in depth of the battle sequences too, because it was definitely, so I would say 90% of the battle sequences are prose until you think about the CGI, which I think we feel similarly on. Like, not all the CGI, the baboon sequence to me was rough.
Yeah, which part of the baboon? Like, which one? Because the other ones I think it was a real monkey. Wait, which?
Not the capuchin.
Oh, in the arena.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first arena scene we get when Denzel is essentially kind of watching and deciding who he wants to put a bid on, when it's Lucius and Jugurtha and some of the other ones from the first war that kind of get captured. They get thrown into this ring, and there's these alien looking baboons.
Yeah, that was a little rough.
That are rough. Like, it's just hard to look at, because it's like, okay, we're at a point where we're like, it's 2024. Like, we have to be able to create some better
Yeah.
looking baboons than what they're doing. Like it
Yeah.
just, to me, it was freaky. Like and not freaky in a good way. It was like, oh man, these things look like crazy violent. It's like, what the fuck am I looking at right now?
It just kind of like it takes you out of it a little bit.
100%
Like,
did
you're
for
like,
me.
oh yeah, it's threatening for sure. But like, oh man, yeah, it ate his face off. All right,
They looked like
let me move on
aliens.
to
Like
the-
they literally looked like aliens. Like
yeah.
it was weird.
I think they were just trying to pick a new animal for this. at
Yeah, like
this
they
point.
couldn't even decide
Yeah.
if they wanted a wildebeest or a baboon, and then Ridley's
Yeah.
like, I like, you know, those two concept arts over there. Why don't we just put those together?
Let's do the
And CGI.
baboon. Let's do the rhino. Let's do that one this time. Because yeah.
The rhino was real, no,
Nah,
or that was CGI too.
CG. That was better, a little better.
It was a little better.
But
The
there was
sharks
some of
were
the
also
movement.
bad.
Sharks are bad.
Great sequence.
Yeah,
Sharks are really bad.
yeah.
So Ridley, if you're watching this, next movie you
Humans.
do, let's focus on either
Humans.
better CGI or let's just keep it to the human.
Well, he did the alien practically in the first Alien too, so maybe he needs to go back to practical effects.
I'd be happy.
I think in the first Gladiator, a lot of the animals are in separate shots practically.
yes,
So
which makes a lot more sense.
maybe we should go back to that.
Maybe
yeah.
we should make
Well,
the
because
movie.
okay, here's my problem too. We're talking about CGI. I also wrote this in another review of just the Napoleon CGI. It was definitely in our
yes,
YouTube review.
yeah.
Terrible stuff with horse. Like you see a horse just like falling back in battle, it gets like shot. It's just everything about it looks too fake. Where you're just taken out of it. You're like, oh, that's rough, and then you're like back in.
I don't want to be misquoted on this either, but I feel that I had seen somewhere that Ridley was asked about working with animals, and I think he's like, it's my least favorite thing to do as a director. So I feel like he might have been like, you know what, fuck it, let's take out every animal possible, let's just replace them with computer generated imagery, and let's see if that's what we want to do. But to me, that was like the biggest con in terms of the movie, where like it actually really takes you, like, because you're in it, you're definitely in it throughout a lot of the movie, and then you see these sequences and you're like, oh my god. You're like, what is like what? That doesn't even look anything like a shark. Like that looks nothing like a monkey. Like what are we doing? So that was the thing that to me took me out of it a little bit. Obviously, it doesn't ruin the movie completely for me.
Sure.
But I think the sad thing is I think the battle sequences are done so well with the actual effectiveness of. I think that Paul. That's why I think Paul kind of thrives. It's interesting because this was his first time kind of doing something like that. Like I feel like he's been best known for doing these smaller sort of indie things. I know Liz is a huge fan of Normal People, which I didn't watch, but Ridley said he basically cast him because of that show. Because he was thinking of the other, by the way, I don't know if you saw this, the other two names he was thinking of for this part
for Paul,
for Lucius. Yeah. The character Lucius before Paul. I couldn't see either one of them doing this. So I'm glad he casted Paul. It was either Timothée Chalamet or Miles Teller. I think both choice. Miles, I think, is a little better. Timmy's a small guy.
Yeah, there's no way.
We can't. I mean,
no
not to
way
say he can't bulk
You
up.
can't tell me that man qualifies for Gladiator.
There's no
He's
way.
barely qualifying for Dune.
I
like
agree.
to me, I'm like sometimes I'm like
he's wiry. That's like his whole thing.
wiry. He's not nimble. He's not Gladiator material. Paul Mescal is yoked in this movie.
He's shredded.
That man's shredded. That is bringing the ladies to the theater right after Wicked.
Liz,
Look,
is it bringing you to the theater?
Liz is ready to go after hearing about Paul.
Liz loves
Yeah,
Paul.
Liz is here.
Liz loves
Her
Paul.
family,
Anyway,
Liz's family.
let's try to bring it back. That's right. This is my fault entirely. No, Paul I think does actually a really good job though of still bearing the weight of what comes with a sequel to a Best Picture winner, while also really differentiating himself from Russell Crowe's portrayal. Did you feel similarly?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think because he's the protagonist too, but he carries the movie for a lot of it. Denzel is, as he exposes himself, becomes more villainous, and Denzel takes up a lot of his scenes. But I do think Paul gives him a run for his money in every scene, because Paul, like, he attacked this role ferociously. Like, he's built out of pure rage. Like in Russell, in his movie, he's going on a revenge plot, but he's a little bit more stoic and meticulous because he's a general, and he's a little more methodical with how he's about to go with things. He thinks of it as a soldier. Paul is a soldier, but I also feel like he has seen blood and tears his entire life, and you feel every part of that
Yeah.
because of his rage. And he's just so fed up with being caged as like a person, and then just in his way of life, like everything good has been taken from him in his life, so he has nothing else to fight for, and he is just blood driven at this point.
Yeah.
Like he's like, everyone has taken stuff from me. I won't be manipulated anymore.
And he's
So,
doing everything in his power to just survive, which
Yes.
I think, like, and you see it like within every
Right.
single sequence and every battle that he has, and the way he eventually becomes a leader to all the other prisoners of war that are there for Maximus and all those
Yeah.
things. What did you think of the final sort of battle, which isn't even really a battle, but it's like the sequence between Lucius and Maximus towards the very end of the movie, when we finally get the face off between.
I liked it. I also was interested to see if they were gonna go through with this like massive army versus army thing.
Yeah,
I thought that was creative. How
to not do that, right?
To not do it, because
I agree.
they also set it up for it. So if anybody's like frustrated that it didn't happen, they set it up throughout the movie that Paul has been projecting this idea, like, we should not be fighting someone else's battles at this point. Like, we need to just fight as one unified thing. He's talking about the glory of Rome and the dream of Rome, how we can be an example for all other people and not be so radicalized and just churned out as a weaponized machine all the time. So when Maximus was ready to rival that with an army too, Paul's just like, I'm throwing down my sword. Like, this isn't happening. Like, we don't have to we don't have to stoop to your level. So
yeah.
I love that. And then there was a nice face off with the two of them. I thought that was great. And then Denzel's hand gets axed. I thought that was great
Crazy
too. I was like, oh,
yeah,
snap.
That was a great scene.
Yeah.
But I also love the little tiny nuances of what that fight represented too, and how Maximus came from being also a slave and a prisoner of war. So it's like, this dude knows how to get down and dirty when he fights, even though he hasn't done it in such a long time. Like, there's something so little, but I loved it in the movie. I was like, oh, that was so cool when they're fighting and he kind of gets the, like, I think Lucius gets the upper hand and he knees him in the stomach and he kind of goes backwards and he takes something on his, like one of the jewels on his wrist or something, and he scrapes it against the rock and it like sparks up. And he, like, it shoots in like Lucius's eye. And I'm like, who else would think to do that at that time, unless you're someone that's privy enough to have been through so much shit that you're going to know these other ways to get ahead of your opponent. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I loved, Ridley had talked about it too in an interview. He was like, what he wanted to do with that sequence is he wanted it to feel like a street fight, which is so cool because it's so the opposite of what we've seen throughout the whole movie. And like you said, I think it sets the tone, and we're constantly crescendoing. And we're thinking we're going to get this giant sequence, but it kind of splits off into this other thing, which I think could be a good talking point for us to go into potentially. Like, they're going to have to do something to subvert things if they're going to make a Gladiator 3. Which
I'm very shocked that they would do a Gladiator 3 after this, because then it makes the needle hole even thinner of how are we going to spin this narrative. Like, it would have to be about something like the fall of Rome. Yeah. And even detach itself from gladiators a little bit, because this whole idea of two movies is the gladiators are being put on display to die, and that's a wrong thing. Like, that's the general focus of the story. And then there's the added storylines for each of the protagonists. But, you know, how many times, like, they've done the revenge angle in both movies. This movie's focuses a little bit more on the spectacle of Rome. Yeah. And then this is like finding the honor in Rome and looking for how do we do that in a power struggle. Now it's like, where do we go from here? Like, I feel like if you're going to do another Roman storyline, it has to be like the fall of Rome. Or
I think I'd actually be more interested in seeing that, though. Yeah. And I think the cool thing, at least... Not that I'm not clamoring for Gladiator 3. I wasn't even expecting Gladiator 2, and I was pleasantly surprised with what the movie gave us. Right. But the thing is, Ridley is not one of those filmmakers that it's like... Ridley's not very... you can't pigeonhole him as a filmmaker because everything he does is so kind of different. You know, it's not like he has these... He likes these bigger sequences, obviously, which you've seen in certain movies, but he also does these smaller kind of stories and these intimate dramas. He'll do horror movies. He'll do sci-fi. Like, he'll do epics. So... I do think that doing something that would subvert expectations again and what people would expect from it would be really cool to see if they were going to go about that. Again, you could just not name that Gladiator 3, but I think he still wants to deal within Lucius and that character.
Yeah.
Which I do think you can see what is left to come of him because he still has to grow into himself as a man. So I'm curious, like if they make Gladiator 3, the only thing is like he's like, I'm writing it now and also he's old. I wish we would do Gladiator 3 like years from now, which you can't do. Like, you know what I mean? Like if Ridley's not around, I wouldn't want to do it at all.
Right.
But I'm intrigued. I'm not like, again, I'm also the same person that's like, we just need to start doing more original stories. But at the same time, we both have discussed along this podcast. Like, I think that he was able to really separate these two films from one another while still paying homage in the right ways to the first movie, while still kind of carving out this place in history, excuse me, for this movie to stand alone as a different sort of thing. Because it's definitely a different movie than the first one, 100%, I think.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of similarities, but like everything we've been saying, this movie stands on its own. And I think you could take out the bits of reference to the first movie and you would still understand what's happening. And you could still understand the major themes and the through line of this movie. So yeah, it does make me wonder like where it will go from here. But I don't really know. I guess time will tell.
Time will tell. We'll have to see. He's writing the script. He said it. So I'll have to wait and see. You ready for scores?
Yeah.
All right. You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. I thought this was a really good movie. It was really enjoyable. It was a great theater experience. I felt that like my theater people were really into it. There was, and I think that a lot of the battle scenes play really well on the big screen. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the first movie, but I think that they're obviously very different stories, as we've said, and there's a different approach to what Ridley wanted to do with this one. I think it's a very solid movie. Yeah. I will definitely return to it, but it wasn't one of my absolute favorites of the year, so I'm going to go with an 8.
Okay.
My overall score is an 8.
Cool. I think that's a solid score. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 because I enjoyed every part of the action in this. I enjoyed Paul and his intensity that he brought to it. Even Denzel was like, Russell delivered in the first, like Paul delivers in this one. I feel like he delivered. Like a lot of people might have problems with this movie, but I feel like Paul is not a problem for anyone.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It would probably be a small margin of people, but Paul delivers. Denzel flips the script a lot. I really like that. There are derivative parts. I think they could have done without a little bit of them, but I like the approach on the falsehood of Rome and the false idols that they hold, and they elaborate on that more than a revenge plot from the first. So I appreciated this movie. It's not perfect. I do like the first one more still. I just think that storyline was really seamless.
Yeah.
This one just has some spots where it's not like necessarily negative. It just it might not be as effective as the first one. So I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 just because I enjoyed it a lot. But I don't know if it's going to be in like my top echelon of the year. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair though too. Mm-hmm. Rapid fire questions for you. Very quick.
Yeah.
You ready?
Sure.
Best picture nomination, yes or no?
To get nominated?
Yes.
There's 10 movies, right?
Yeah, it can go up to 10.
So I think there will be one.
Okay. Yeah. Best lead actor for Paul. Does he get nominated?
I want to say no.
Yeah. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to get it.
I think it's a hard year
6 or 7
for males.
Yeah. So I think he'd be on the cusp. Denzel.
I think Denzel gets one.
Okay.
Do
you think Denzel wins?
I haven't seen everything yet. I think he's like in a top 2 choice. Maybe.
Based on what I've seen this year, I would pick Denzel to win. But I think it's...
Yeah. I can't remember everything that I've seen this year yet, but like off the top of my head. But there's still a lot of award-winning movies yet to come out or award acclaimed.
Yeah.
I think he's got a shot. I feel like if there's a winner out of this movie, it would be Denzel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Last one.
Yeah.
Does Ridley get a Best Director nom and potentially win his first Oscar?
No.
Neither. Not nominated or wins.
Maybe nominated. I don't think he wins.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
have to wait and see. We still have a while. Oscars aren't until March, but it's award season.
Yeah.
So lots to think about. But that was fun. Thank you guys for joining us for the Gladiator 2 review. Let us know in the comments, what were your guys' thoughts on Gladiator 2? Did you like this movie just as much or maybe more than the original Gladiator? Do you like it less than the original Gladiator? Award stuff. What do you guys think were your favorite performances? Was Lucius your favorite character? Macrinus? Obviously, we have the Emperors. I thought Pedro had to put in a really good performance in this film as well. Connie Nielsen also was great returning as Lucilla. But let us know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were. We'd love to have a conversation with you guys. We love talking to you guys in the comments. You could also like this video if you can and subscribe to us here at the Culture Wave Media Network. We cover all things film and television. As I said in the beginning of the review, our Wicked review is up. We just covered part 2 of season 6 of Cobra Kai. We're covering Yellowstone. We just did Arcane. It's award season. Tons of other stuff coming for you guys. So definitely be sure to check that stuff out. And you can follow us on all our social media, which is underneath me currently in the video, and it's also in our description. Just signing off, I am Darian Scalamoni.
I'm Zach Miller.
And we'll see you guys next time.
This is The Culture.